I love to dance. And it started when I was a little girl. I would spend hours in my room desperately trying to teach myself how to tap dance. Because every time I begged my parents for lessons, they always said, Marianne, tap dance lessons are expensive. It doesn't fit in our budget. You're going to need to learn it on your own. I was 4. So it's still on my bucket list. And one of these years, I'm going to be in a recital of a bunch of toddlers tap dancing. Now, I loved the 80s, big hair, aerobic dance. So when my husband, Mark, and 2 toddler boys lived in Salt Lake City, Utah, I had my own aerobic dance program. Yeah, aerobic dance with Marianne. Now, when we moved back to Lancaster in the early 90s, our boys were now in elementary school, and Mark said it was time that I get a real job. A real job? I thought dancing one time a day was a real job. Mark didn't, so I got a real job, but I continued taking aerobic dance classes in the evenings a couple nights a week to satisfy the dance needs I have. Now, the neighborhood we moved into, a lot of the neighbors were the original homeowners. They were already in their 60s. 20 years went by, and as their homes started to sell, some of my neighbors started saying, our neighborhood is changing. What they meant was we now had a mixed race neighborhood, and some of my neighbors didn't like it. A month after my husband passed away, my neighbors to the right said, Marianne, we're moving to Brethren Village. They were the best neighbors I ever had, and I begged them to stay because I didn't want any more loss or change in my life. And they're like, Marianne, we've already stayed in our house too long. We're already in our 90s. So I couldn't convince them to stay. So the day they backed out of their driveway for the last time, I stood there with tears running down my face because I already convinced myself that whoever was going to be my neighbor next was not going to be as good a neighbor to me. So a couple hours later, I saw a moving truck pull into that driveway. I decided to put my big girl pants on and welcome my new neighbor. I walked over, I introduced myself, and he was young, and when he smiled, he had these deep dimples. And he didn't say a word. He just stood there as I talked a mile a minute like I do, and 10 minutes. All of a sudden, he looked at me and said, hi, thank you, bye. And he walked away. I realized the whole time I was talking, my new neighbor didn't understand a word I was saying. And the next day, my neighbor across the street, Jose, he's bilingual, and he told me that my new neighbor's name was Eurykes, and he was born and raised in Cuba, and he knew very little English. So Eurykes and I had a hard time communicating with each other. So I went to my Spanish-speaking expert, my 2-year-old grandson. He has a Spanish-speaking nanny, and I thought he could teach Nan some Spanish, but the only word he wanted to teach me was caca, which means poop. So that was no help. Now, one day I came home with these big bags of mulch that the salesperson loaded in the back of my RAV4. But when I got home, I thought, great, how am I going to get these out myself? And all of a sudden, I heard, hi, it was Eurykes. Now, a couple months went by, and I thought, maybe he knows a little more English. And I said, I have heavy bags. Can you help me? And he shook his head, yes. And I turned around thinking he was going to be standing there, but he wasn't. And when I looked up, he was walking into his house, and he turned around and said, thank you. Oh, man, we still weren't connecting. That winter was the first one without Mark, and to stay busy in the evenings, I knitted all these scarves, and I handed them out to friends at Christmas. But there was one I wasn't sure who I was going to give it to. And we had the first snow that January, and it was just a dusting. But all of a sudden, I heard a high-powered snowblower in my driveway, and I thought, you got to be kidding me. I was pretty sure I could go out there and just blow it away with my breath. But I looked out. There were those dimples. Probably the first snow that Eurykes ever saw, and he was going to snow blow it. Now, I noticed that his neck was all red, so I grabbed that scarf. It was folded in a square, and I ran it out, and he turned off the snowblower, and I had already looked up scarf for your neck in Spanish. So I said that, and I handed it to him. He said, thank you. I went in the house, and I thought, this is probably Eurykes' first scarf. So I looked out. Now, he got the idea that the scarf belonged on the neck, but he still had it folded in a square like this. And this is how he was snow blowing. I wanted a way that I could connect with him, some way that we could understand each other. And then last summer, one day he was out all day, working at the garden beside his driveway. And that evening he called me over and he pointed to it and he was all proud of it. And all of a sudden I heard a familiar song coming out of his garage because I danced to it every week at Zumba. That's how I got my dance fix in my late 60s. So I started doing the samba. Eurykes looked at me and he goes, "Samba?" And all of a sudden, he started doing the samba too. And there we were in his driveway. We were gyrating our hips at the same time. We were shimmying our chest. We started doing the cha-cha. I felt like we were connecting for the first time. We finally understood each other. Yes, our words still get lost in translation all the time. But I feel like Eurykes and I have found a way to communicate through something we both love to do, dance. So now every time a neighbor says to me, "Boy, hasn't our neighborhood changed?" I say, "Yes, it has." And isn't it wonderful? Thank you.